And I'm going to start this morning with the Irish Examiner. Circle of Ignorance, says the front page here. This is Derek McGrath's column saying narrow-minded blind analysis has failed Waterford hurling. So strong stuff from Derek McGrath, who's been writing for the Examiner over the last couple of months. Terrible season, really, excuse me, for Waterford in the Championship. They won't find vision for future in populist barstool jibes, he says. So this has been something that Derek McGrath has kind of been railing against over the last couple of months, this analysis against the sort of way he thinks about hurling, against the way that his Waterford team have played, and it's something that he's standing by here. Talks about physical development here, skill development, mental capacity, life management and awareness. They're the things that Waterford needs to work on over the next couple of weeks or next couple of months and potentially years, if this goes a lot deeper than just the senior manager or who may come next. Yeah,
it's kind of sad, isn't it, when you consider where Waterford were 2 years ago in the All-Ireland final. And I just often felt that Derek got a lot of, like you said, barstool analysis without any depth in it, really, because there was a reason why he had them playing the way he did. So when they weren't playing that way, we saw what happened. But yeah, it was something, it's more to it than physical ability and more to it than playing ability, because it was like their hearts just weren't in it. They just gave up, because I was down on Walsh Park at their last game and against Limerick, and it was terrible to watch emotionally. They weren't there, and that's the big worry, because if that's how the top team in Waterford are feeling, can you imagine how that feeling of apathy must have seeped down in all the other teams? It's not good.
No, it's happened so quickly as well, and I think that there will be a lot of unfair criticism thrown at Pádraig Fanning because he's not Derek McGrath. And I think it was John Milan actually in the Irish Independent last Saturday just made the point that anybody could have been managing this Waterford team. If you're not Derek McGrath, you're going to get it from all sides if you put in the season like that. So I think perhaps there will be a one-dimensional view, but ultimately Pádraig Fanning will accept that the buck stops with him on the basis of this one season. They're way better than they showed this year, and it's so strange given the way they finished the league campaign, bar the league final, getting themselves to Croke Park from that position was a really, really good and encouraging start to the year. It was like, right, you ally that with the fact that they're going to be playing at Walsh Park this summer. This could be a bloody good year for Waterford, and it just hasn't materialised like that. It's really, really unusual, and like the encouraging thing from their perspective is that the age profile of the squad is still there. This is still a squad that was unbelievable at under 21 a couple of years ago. This is still a squad that has a hurler of the year in the team that is still in and around his prime, or perhaps he's going to get back to his prime pretty soon as well, because he's got years and years left. So I think it's encouraging for them, but according to Derek McGrath, there's issues here in the county that run a lot deeper.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, like we look back at the league, obviously during the league we were all out at matches and we were interviewing managers and asking, look, are you really respecting the league? Because the league was of no consequence this year, really. And they were like, oh no, the league is very important. Evidently it wasn't. So perhaps we were all lulled into a false sense of security about Waterford's prospects. And then I was down at the Waterford-Clare game at Walsh Park, and that game was lost on the sideline, really. There was just a few, you could say it was naivety or whatever, and it's easy for us, we're sitting up in the press box, we're not the ones down there in the heat of battle, and who knows, there might be reasons why Pádraig Fanning made the decisions he made. And at the same time, they were beaten by Clare, and we're thinking, oh geez, Clare are great. And then we saw what happened to Clare. So really, perhaps Waterford and the Clares of the world have been way off the races, and we just haven't had any evidence or proof of it until recently. And I just think Waterford, though, are in a worse position than Clare, because we've heard rumblings for years in the county board in Waterford and stuff that things just aren't as professional as they could be or should be, and that managers have had to fight very hard to get things done. And compared to other counties, other counties seem to have gotten their act together maybe a bit quicker. And there is a big worry in Waterford now that unless something comes in and does a complete overhaul of the structure, it's more to do than just the team now. And yeah, former hurler of the year in there, he didn't look like it.
No.
His heart was totally not there. And that's worrying.
Hugely worrying. You've got the Times Ireland edition.
Yes, I do. What have I got here? Times Ireland edition, on the front page, we have a photo of Rory McIlroy grimacing, willing his ball along, and also the headline, Guinness quit over Jackson. Of course, this is the big story that's been rumbling now for 2 days, which is Diageo pulling out of sponsorship with London Irish due to London Irish signing Paddy Jackson.
The Maire this morning goes with a couple of football stories, like their Lampet. Juventus tell Chelsea to drop £5 million fee for Boss or risk losing their number one target, Frank. And why I kiss goodbye to Chelsea, Hazard says, I want to be world's best player in the world's best team. Also revealing yesterday that basically he'd made his mind up that he's going to go to the Bernabeu this time last year. So I'm not sure is that a statement of brilliance from Eden Hazard or one of stupidity, because he had a good season, and it's like fair play in putting in a season like that when you know you're not going to be at the club next season, or perhaps it's something that is like, how good could he have been if his heart was actually in it? So I don't know. I'd be very interested to see how Eden Hazard works out at Real Madrid, because he's 28 years old. This is the sort of move that perhaps he could have made happen a couple of years ago. Then again, the pecking order has changed a little bit. Chelsea have been relegated down a couple of rungs in the ladder, you'd imagine. And Real Madrid clearly just had this lure that nobody else could kind of give them at the moment. So I think that's a fascinating signing. We might come back to the Lampard news as well in just a moment.
And here we have, again, this is the Irish Daily Mail, and we've got Supermac, Rory shrugs off bogey start to storm US Open. And underneath, Boner slams unacceptable McCann actions. I was actually up at that game last Saturday night, Donegal against Tyrone, and I spoke to Declan Boner and I asked him, you know, what was his reaction? Of course, usual managerial answer, I haven't seen it yet. And of course, in fairness, he may not have, because it did happen off the ball. But funnily enough, when we were speaking, Stephen McManaman happened to walk past us and Declan said, his face looks okay. And then poor Stephen took a bit of a shock when he saw everybody talking about him. He knocked over a whole pile of water cooler glasses while he was trying to sign a jersey for a child, and there was a whole high hoo-ha, and I was like, I'll leave him alone. But neither here nor there, it did happen off the ball. The crowd, it was the opposite end of the press box where I was, and so I didn't actually see it happen, but I saw a skirmish, but obviously I had no detail. But then straight away we could see the replays in the press box. It was not nice.
Why is it taking so long to actually get to the conclusion here of what's going to happen to Tiernan McCann?
I'm assuming the reason it takes so long is they have to wait for the referee's report. I'm assuming that's in by now. And again, this is all assumptions. I'm assuming the referee was David Goff. I'm assuming he didn't see it because he just wasn't there. That's not his fault. So I'm assuming that means they have to wait to see how he's written things up in the report. Then it goes to CCCC. They have to sit. They're volunteers and all this kind of stuff as well. So they have, I assume, either have a sitting arranged or they have to arrange to come together. It takes time.
The back page of the Irish Daily Star is Rocket Man. Rory gets off to a flyer at US Open. Brilliant round from Rory McIlroy yesterday at Pebble Beach. Conditions really suiting him. FAI board mull over review. The FAI board yesterday engaged in what was described as lengthy deliberations as they met in Limerick to consider the draft report of the governance review group. So the meeting, which began at 10 p.m, they didn't get out of there until 4 p.m, and there was a couple of recommendations. Key among them is to form a new 12-person board with at least 4 females and 4 independent directors. The FAI Council will also be reduced should the report be ratified by a 2/3 majority at next month's AGM. So this is all essentially just floating out there at the moment, and next month it'll rubber stamp it if they want to proceed with it. Tiernan will be gutted, so they've gone with a different kind of angle. Orla Bannon writing about Declan Boner's quotes, saying that, I think, in fairness to Declan Boner, he's been quite reasonable here in terms
Very
of
restrained.
what's happened. And the other story here in the back of the Star, Celtic face battle for French star. So Celtic could face a fight with Celta Vigo to land Christopher Jullien. So Celtic basically keen on signing the Toulouse fellow. 6'5", be a good addition to Celtic. So we'll see how that transfer story develops.
And sure, we have The Guardian, and their back page is Sky may not be the limit. Cricket World Cup final, could you get go free to air? And that's been a big controversy rumbling in England now since cricket went to pay-per-view, because apparently they had X amount of viewers and went to pay-per-view, it dropped dramatically, and then they're saying it's had an effect as well on grassroots cricket in the country. So there's been a campaign ever going since that, you know, they should get cricket back on free to air. So that's that. And Garden of Eden, Real Madrid supporters flocked to welcome Hazard after his move from Chelsea, but Belgium star warns, I know Galactico.
He's also pictured here on the back page of the Irish Sun. Kiss Chase is the headline. Hazard says the Real deal was done a year ago, as I mentioned. Mac goes on attack. That's Rory McIlroy carding a 68 yesterday at Pebble Beach. And Travers in demand. Norwich City and Leeds United are eyeing up Mark Travers, 20-year-old who's obviously made a couple of Premier League appearances for Bournemouth. He's got 2 years left on his contract at the moment and is expected to be rewarded for his promotion to the first team with a longer, improved deal. So the club, Bournemouth, have yet to re-sign Artur Boruc. That is probably the first step before we can actually see how Mark Travers is going to progress. Norwich City or Leeds United, obviously a good move to him if he gets game time week in, week out, and Bournemouth tell him you're going to be backup goalkeeper. You'd imagine if he's going to become first choice, particularly for Norwich City, he's going to move there. So that's exciting stuff to hear for Mark Travers. Our goalkeeper depth is growing all the time for the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah, very much so. Here we have the sports pullout of the Herald, and we have injured Froome to get 2011 Vuelta title, and Rory hits the ground fast. McIlroy gets the start he craved at the US Open.
The Racing Post at the front page, they go with Burns and Blast at BHA. for treatment of Irish trainers. So Charles Burns believes Irish trainers are being unfairly treated by the BHA because he was called into a pre-race inquiry to outline riding instructions and expectations. And then the back page is irresistible force versus immovable object. Sparks set to fly is World Cup's hottest bowling attack meets the most explosive batting lineup. So it's England against the West Indies in the Cricket World Cup at around 10:30 this morning.
And here we have the Irish Independent on the back page here. It's a GAA heavy back page. Semi-pro is the GAA's Brexit according to Leash star Ciara Healy. And Carlo Starr's plea to make noise for the hurling future. And that's Paul Coady, who yesterday spoke out with a really thoughtful Twitter thread about Carlo hurling and hurling in general and direction of hurling in Ireland and where are we going with it.
We'll get to that in just a moment, but you just got one more newspaper to go through.
One more. This is the Irish Times, and I just left it open here on Jackie Tyrrell's column, where his statement there is playing Wexford away is like a tribal war. And he wrote a really good line here, and he said, I never like going there. Normally the only nice thing from days going to Wexford Park was the steak in the Ferry Carrick Hotel after the game. Beautiful county, great spot to visit, lovely people, but a brutal place to go and hurl. And that's going to be an epic game on Saturday night. Kilkenny playing Wexford in Wexford Park on the back of a loss last week.
It seems that the only thing that those great Kilkenny players have PTSD over is Wexford Park.
Yes.
So I asked Tommy Walsh about that on the show a couple of months back about what's the toughest ground he's ever had to go to.
He shudders.
Yeah, and he says Wexford Park as well. He mentions a minor match they played in Wexford Park where they lost 10 points to 1-5, which, to be fair, is probably a game that's worth watching out of the fascination of how terrible it must have been. But he says that they just ran through him, and he didn't mean the players, he meant the supporters at Wexford Park running through him. That is always the thing we tend to see, is that the players flocking in, and it's an all too familiar sight from a Kilkenny perspective over the last couple of years, going down to Wexford Park and getting beaten. They tend to love playing Kilkenny at the moment, so it's going to be, I think the Leinster Championship this weekend is the big one. I've got a feeling that Limerick against Tip is going to be a fair degree of shadow boxing, and it could well be the Munster hurling final. We're going to get to that in 10 minutes, but we want to come back to Paul Cody's comments to Carlo Hurler. He got it there on the back of the Irish Independent. It's basically, he's got a column written for the Irish Indo this morning, but it's basically his slew of tweets that he put up yesterday. We can bring up a couple of them on screen. So at Paul_Coady 10, I write the below with my Carlo hurling goggles firmly on as a present Carlo hurler / fan with a worry for what's ahead. There are many counties the same, but I'm just sharing my Carlo perspective. Apologies for the long thread and understand many will disagree. That's okay. So let's get into a couple of these. I'm too worried about the future of Carlo hurling to not at least ask these questions to the GAA. He's asking, is Carlo going down to the Joe McDonagh the best thing for Carlo hurling? What's the best case scenario here for Carlo over the next 1, 5, 10 years? Why is there a relegation from Leinster but not from Munster? Regardless if we're even at Waterford's level yet, it's still hugely unfair. Relegating Waterford would be wrong because it wouldn't do anything for Waterford hurling. And it's a shame the same doesn't apply to Carlo. Hurling has 9 top counties, all at a relatively similar level. For 100 years, aside from Offaly and Antrim, no other teams have ever featured in the All-Ireland. The GAA has had 100 years to bridge that gap from the other 21 counties and have never done. Is this not a massive failure? I just want to stop here for a moment and kind of come back to that comment about Waterford. What's the exact line about Waterford's relegation there?
He said, regardless if we're even at Waterford's level yet, it is still hugely unfair. Relegating Waterford would be wrong because it wouldn't do anything for Waterford hurling, and it's a shame the same doesn't apply to Carlo.
Just because it's the first thing we brought up there, let's just talk about that for a moment, because I agree with a lot of what Paul Coady is saying here, but this is the one thing I don't agree with. The idea that you have to somehow jettison the idea of relegation because it doesn't do anything for the team that's relegated. Yeah. Why does any competition have relegation or promotion in the world? Like, if every competition is worried about the well-being of one county in the very short term, because let's face it, that's all relegation or promotion does, then of course they would scrap relegation or promotion. But that's not how it works. That's not how elite sport works. And let's face it, like the idea that he's talking about there, as in this elite group of hurling counties, like, should relegation and promotion not be encouraged in an ideal world where he wants to allow the game to grow outside of the elite counties? Like, fair enough that it's unequal that Leinster has relegation promotion and Munster doesn't. Maybe that should be changed to the fact that Munster should have relegation promotion. Granted, Kerry wouldn't stand a chance in any relegation promotion playoff ever. But I just don't understand that. And it's the same thing when it comes to the football, as in, like, what good would it do for a team getting relegated to Tier 2? Well, it might give them the opportunity to win Tier 2 and to come back up. Like, the journey that Carlo have been on has been pretty good. Like, they've got into a stage now where people are talking about them a lot more than they used to. That came from playing in a Tier 2 competition. The gap is closing between them and the Tier 1 counties, the traditional Tier 1 counties. That can continue to happen even if they get relegated. Like, he makes a point about television coverage. I think it's a separate point. Like, the idea that somehow you scrap relegation just because it's not good for the county that's getting relegated. Like I'm all for promoting and for allowing counties to get the best out of themselves, but ultimately you have to have some sort of competition at the elite level. Like, I don't know, it's something that kind of annoys me a little bit, that we somehow just need to forget about relegation because it's not good for the county that's getting relegated.
Yeah, because it kind of reminds me of last summer. Do you remember a lot of soul-searching and Eoin about Offaly Hurling when they were relegated, and people saying, sad day for Offaly Hurling? Absolutely is. Offaly, it's bad for Hurling, for Offaly to be relegated. And you're thinking, well, for how long, how many years are we seeing the warning signs of Offaly Hurling, and eventually they fell off that cliff down to the next tier? Whose fault is that? Do you know, it's not the GAA. Well, you could argue maybe it is the GAA's fault in another maybe angle when you talk about funding and admin and all that kind of stuff. But in general, it's not the other county's fault. It's not Carlow's fault. If Offaly weren't relegated last year, Carlow wouldn't be up there. So is it doing Carlow any good in the short term? No, but I think his point makes sense in that he says, you know, let's look at investment. Let's look at what can we do to, at the very least, that if you're going to be going down a tier, that the gap is still closing every year. Because you're absolutely right. I think you do need relegation. It brings competition into it. It's not fair that it doesn't happen in Munster. And like you said, Kerry, would they have a chance anyway against any of the teams? You could argue they might have a fairly good chance against Waterford.
Well, the thing is, if Kerry had won the Joe McDonagh, that would have actually happened.
Yeah.
There is relegation.
But it's very, very hard to be relegated in Munster. It's made very difficult to be relegated.
He's technically not right there. There is relegation in Munster, but it has to be Kerry who win the Joe McDonagh for that to happen. So it is unequal in fairness. I just don't agree with that point. But that's pretty much the only thing I do disagree with, because the rest of his stuff seems to be pretty much banging the money. We'll bring up a few more tweets here from his account over the last 24 hours. He talks about the idea of funding. He talks about the idea of the inequality of the counties and the finances that we have. We might just get those tweets up on screen to actually get to those in a moment. But so this year, Carlow Hurling had attendances for the first time in my career. It had colour. It had kids playing hurling more than ever. It had a buzz within the county. Take the Liam McCarthy away, and Carlow Hurling loses that. Do Carlow Hurling go quietly and make as little noise as possible? Take this as our peak, and thanks for the memories, and just watch as the county will eventually slip backwards in a hurling regard and spend the next 100 years while we're spent the last 100. Now that's a very negative idea of relegation. Like, I know it's not fair, and we will get to the idea of why it's not fair, but like, you get relegated, you get better, you get promoted better. Like, you can get relegated well. Like, we've seen it in professional sport, and I accept it's not like for like. But anyway, I realistically think on some days that the other 21 counties would be better coming together and boycotting the GAA, this is the big one, until serious promotion, financial aid and planning was put in place to help these counties wanting to improve climb these levels. This is where it gets really interesting, and this is where the injustice is actually there. And it comes to the ideas like finances, and it comes to the idea of what Carlow are actually getting. Basically, his point is that Carlow will always have a better chance of getting relegated because they're not given the same amount of support when it comes to development funding, when it comes to actually putting together a structure from the top level down that will allow Carlow Hurling to thrive, like a Wexford, for example. That's not happening, and that's where the injustice lies.
Yeah, absolutely. And he put in one example here. For example, our training for pre-championship was a day in Tramore, while other counties in the Liam McCarthy in 2019 are able to head to a foreign country for a full week's training and tactics. It's not the making of a successful team, but it helps to show the gulf between the counties. And that's it exactly. He's not saying, where's my foreign trip? He's saying, this is the difference between the two teams. That's just one example. So I'm assuming that difference is also there in facilities, in the budget they have for training, and the budget they have for players, and the budget they have for food, for everything else. The gulf is so wide. So straight away, when you're starting off, when you're not even getting the same amount of money financially for each team that are playing in the same competition, coupled with the fact that they don't have the history the other counties have, they don't have the culture, they don't have, I suppose, the lovely hurling, they don't have the natural flicks that we say people in Kilkenny have. They have it because they've been growing up with it from day one. They don't have that in Carlow, so every little success is hard fought. So every success in Carlow is worth more than a Kilkenny success, we'll say. We
do have Conor McKeown on the line, and we'll get to him in just a moment, but just explain to us the point about coverage here as well, because he speaks about the fact that ultimately Carlow were the one team, and this is where I agree with him, that Carlow were the noticeable absence from the extended highlights on the Sunday game every week. They've been relegated to a 2-minute package every week, but his key point here is that at least they're getting that 2-minute package. When they were in the Joe McDonagh Cup, they weren't getting that.
Yeah, that's what he says here. He says 9 of the 10 Liam McCarthy teams had games shown live. 1 team hadn't. 1 team had a 2-minute voiceover every Sunday night, with every other team having highlights or analysis. 1 of the 10 teams needs a promotion more than the other 9, and that team is obviously Carlow. At least a 2-minute voiceover was more than the 0 coverage the Joe McDonagh teams got, with these counties also crying out for promotion. This is why Gaelic footballers don't want a second tier, because they know it will get no respect or coverage. Now, one thing I will say about that is, I know this is pointing a big arrow toward the Sunday game, which goes out every Sunday evening. I used to work in that programme a few years ago. It is a massive machine. The editors, the producers, they put so much work into it, and people say, well, of course you'll say that. But I saw for myself the amount of work that goes into it, and they only have a certain amount of time, and this is the issue. You only have X amount of minutes of a Sunday night. It doesn't matter how much will or goodwill you have in the world. And excuse me, we would have staff all over the country. The same amount of effort would go into all those packages, because I was one of those people who would put, say, a voiceover on Waterford playing Wicklow in the football, say, and I might get 2 minutes for a 70-minute plus game. You'd have to watch the game, try and find the most talking points. Of course, you'd have to leave something out. You were kind of making that editorial decision. But that wasn't your fault, because you had a slot and that was it. And I often think when people are complaining about not showing this, not showing that, instead of blaming RTE, instead of blaming TG4, instead of blaming people who have rights, let's look at the organisation, the GAA, who own the rights. Why aren't people putting pressure on them to broadcast more of these games? Either create their own channel, give us a subscription, give us the games online. It's meant to be for the public, for the people, for the communities. So why can't you log on and watch it? Now, you could argue again, rural broadband, this is another issue which the GAA can't help. But if people are crying out for coverage, which every game should be covered, absolutely, let's not always just blame the one programme that goes out on a Sunday night.
What's your answer to the idea that if there's a Tier 2 football championship, things will just get forgotten? Because clearly, on the evidence of what Paul Coady is saying here, that has happened in the hurling championship.
Forgotten by who? I just don't think that's a good enough reason that, oh, you lose your 2-minute slot in the Sunday game, therefore I don't want a second tier championship. That's just not good enough. It's not fair on the people who are playing. People need to have reason to play. It is very, very hard to motivate yourself to go out and play for a competition. You have a hope of winning. Never mind going out to play in a game, you have a hope of winning. It's just, it puts people off. Like, why would you bother watching it for a start, even as a spectator? Think about it. Like, why? Whereas Carlow and Laois, going at it in hurling, say, if you've it there, if you think, oh, I can watch this, I can just go onto the website, or there's a special channel that I can watch it, or it's live, and it'll be competitive. You'll watch it, because Irish people will watch 2 flies in a boxing ring fighting if they wanted to, if there's a competition in it. So this is the issue. I just don't think that's a good enough reason to not have Tier 2. It's not fair on the players, and I know perhaps they may say, well, I want my opportunity. Yes, there's a way of doing that, and we've so many discussions about Champions League formats, this, that and the other, but your 2 minutes in the Sunday game, is that enough reason to not change? I don't think so.